Love, a feeling that knows no bounds, that follows no rules. The phenomenal love stories of so many people has come down across generations and have made their impact in history, poetry, and folklore. This feeling, universal, beautiful, and eternal, is the foundation of our 5 day talk series, Love आजकल मोहब्बत की दास्तान पन्नों के उस पार, where across 5 days we will be discussing 5 historical romances that have captivated the world with their beauty and the story. While there are many love stories that have made their impact in the history pages, but not many have come down through generations and made their way into the popular culture. One such example of this story, this such would be Heer Ranjha. It is not just a tale of two lovers, but a reflection of societal norms, rebellion, and an eternal struggle between love and fate. Today, in this discussion on legendary topic, we have with us a distinguished scholar, Professor Anisur Rahman, a literary connoisseur of English and Urdu. His work and publications of over more than a dozen span across areas like post-colonial, translation, comparative, and Urdu studies. His most recent publication and bestseller, The Essential Ghalib, has been shortlisted for Kaliga Literary Award. So, today's session, with his insights and on literature and cultural narratives, this discussion promises to be as poetic as it is thought-provoking. So, if you are a lover of history, folklore, or simply someone who is enchanted by the magic of love stories, stay with us because Heer Ranjha goes beyond the legend and is a mirror of our desires, tales, and struggles. Hello, sir. Welcome to this discussion.
Thank you.
This is our first installment of 5 day session that we will be having over other days. And the first topic is Heer Ranjha, a story that has captivated and influenced the people of India since they are their childhood. What drew you to Heer and Ranjha?
First of all, let me thank you for this initiative. And you say this is the first talk that is going to happen in this series.
Yes,
So
sir.
I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to be speaking to you on this occasion. Let me tell you, this is a very novel idea that we have chance to you have thought of, and you are going to share these thoughts with your listeners and viewers. So all the very best to you and those who are here on this channel, so that we can develop some kind of a rapport and a conversation. Uh, I was just trying to find how history in the past relates to us in the present moment of time, and how the past and the present taken together take us to future. So I thought of stories, therefore, and the stories that are very important for us to take note of and that we remember also are the stories that come from mythology, that come from history, and that also come from personal lives. But more important is, what are these stories and why do we remember these stories? There must be something behind these stories. So the story is not complete unto itself. There is something behind the stories that it keeps coming to us and it becomes a part of our collective consciousness. There are certain very basic elements in their stories that you relate with. That is, what are the hallmarks? How does it define your destiny? How does it define your time? And how does it define the patterns of history? That is the past and the present and the future, because they all relate together. And in that large scale of time, human beings exist from place to place and from time to time, and therefore they relate in a larger manner. So there are stories of love and there are stories of war, and these stories are very important for us to understand our present position as also to see us ourselves in the lens of the future with reference to the past and the present. So that is why we visit his places, iconic figures of the past, which are maybe the stories or the heroes of the past, wars or the love stories that we have had either in mythology or otherwise in history. I was therefore once thinking of who are the poets whose stories of love stories, for example, are so very important for us to take note. So I developed a longer list and I wrote about them all. So first came to me the idea of Kulio Qutub Shah. Kulio Qutub Shah is a very important poet, and he's supposed to be the first Sahib Diwan, as you call it, a poet with a complete Diwan to himself, and he was the fifth emperor of Qutub Shahi dynasty of Hyderabad that you know of today. So I looked at his life and found that he was a great lover. So I wrote a piece on the love life of Kali Qutub Shah. Then came the idea, another idea, another. I got came across another poet, that is Afzal Panipati, also known as Afzal Jhanjhanvi. That is a very wonderful story of love that I came across and I wrote about. I thought of Ghalib, I thought of Momin, I thought of Dagh. These are all very iconic figures of Urdu poetry that you know of, and they have all their love stories that we know about, and I wrote about them, all of them. There is a story of Iqbal, there is the story of Josh Malihabadi, there is a story of Majaz Lakhnavi, there is a story of Sahir Ludhianvi, there is a story of Josh Malihabadi, of Jigar, for example, of Miraji, for example. Very interesting stories of Miraji. So I looked at this whole chain of the poets who were writing right from the beginnings to now, and I found at least a dozen whose love lives were very significant. So I wrote about them individually. But going beyond that, I also looked at history and I also looked at mythology, and I found there were so many that one could really lay one's hands upon and discover them and how how they could be read in terms of their love lives. So I came across a number of them. Say, for example, the story of Heer and Ranjha, the story of Laila and Majnu, the story of Shiri and Farhad, the story of Satyavan and Savitri, the story of Dushyant and Shakuntala. So these are the stories which are so very important for us, and we learn from them. These are the iconic figures, I would say. These are the figures who come to our imagination again and again for the value that they command. And one thing very interesting I found that you never say Shiri and Farhad, you say Shiri Farhad, you say Laila Majnu, you say Heer Ranjha. These are hyphenated, means the two together exist. They exist together. You do not separate and with and, Heer and Ranjha. You say Heer Ranjha, Shiri Farhad, etc. like that. So this caught my imagination. That's how we started working on that and wrote a series on this, about 10 series or so. In that context, the story of Heer Ranjha also came before me, and that is how I we are here today to talk about this series that you are thinking about.
So there are many stories, as you said, in history. So, but some remain confined to the pages of history. But and some like he Ranjha go beyond the pages, go beyond the local narratives, and eh, like they have come down through generations, for ages, for more than 7 to 8 centuries. What uh, what was such thing that it captivated the world so that their story traveled so far?
Uh, this story of Heer Ranjha is about 600 years old now, and it has been told by many writers, many poets and prose writers in different languages, and it has traveled far and wide. So Heer and Raja are iconic figures like Shiri and Farhad, for example, like Laila and Majnu, for example, and Dushyanta and Shakuntala, for example, or Satyavan and Savitri, for example. So it's a very iconic figure. And this is the story of Heer, who belonged to a place called Jung, which now falls in Punjab. And the story of Ranjha, who also belonged to the same place at about, close by. And that is how this story moves forward. It was such a captivating story that after they could not meet in life, but they met in death only. And their graves are there in Jung, and people go there as if it's kind of a mausoleum for the lovers, and they visit it. That is why the mythic, they acquired a kind of a mythic value, or a mythic, they became myths in a way. And that is how they have become part of the imagination of the common people, of the secular imagination. I would like to use this word, secular imagination. And it has been told in so many languages. For example, Waris Shah made it very popular. The version of Waris Shah is very popular, who did it in 1766. And in several other languages, like for example, it has been written, this story has been written in Sindhi, in Haryanvi, in Hindi, in Urdu, in Persian, in English, and so many other languages. Which is very interesting to know that there are 20 versions at least in Persian, different versions by different writers of Heer and Ranjha's story, and not less than 15 in the Urdu language. Similarly, in Hindi and other languages that you have. So it has, that is how the iconic figure, the iconic value, and the mythic status that they achieved through time, and that is how they have become so immortal, and they have gone from one place to another.
So, as there are many versions here of Heer Ranjha, but most popular in India being of Varis Shah, and his story and his writing has quite influenced the story of Heer Ranjha in actuality. So, but even before, prior to him, there were versions of Heer Ranjha. But why was Varis Shah's version that reached to people more?
See, there are many ways of writing, and it all depends on how you present your story to the reader or to the listener. The first person who laid his hands upon this story was Damodar Aurora. And this is the time of Akbar, Emperor Akbar. And he wrote that, it is said that he wrote it for the first time during the reign of Akbar. And he had heard about this story during the time of Akbar from someone called, say, Rajaram Khatri. So he heard it from that. And then he put it on paper and he wrote it down as such. But he traveled from one place to another, from one group of readers to another group of readers, from one location to another, historical places, from one place to another. So from place to place, from tongue to tongue, from people to people, it kept on traveling. So the first storyteller with reference to Heer and Ranjha was Damodar Arora, and after that you have this Khatri, and then it goes finally. So many, as I just said, that in Persian, Urdu, Hindi, and other languages that we know of, that is Sindhi and Haryanvi and Punjabi, etc. This story has got. But the most authentic, because depends on how you look at the whole story, the most authentic became Warisha's story, which was written in 1766, mid 18th century, a little later than that, and it became a very popular one. That is how. But there are poems about Heer and Ranjha that have been written. There are stories, novels, and films, and it has been represented in a variety of ways in theaters, etc. So it has traveled. Stories of this kind do not belong to a particular author. Heer Ranjha's story is not of a particular author. It has gone from, as I have told you, from Persian to Urdu to Hindi to all other languages, and different writers are there. So you cannot just pinpoint and say this is the version, because there are variations in the version, especially when the story of Heer Ranjha comes to an end, and according to Varisha, it comes to an end. But then it goes further. There are people who have added that no, it didn't happen like that. It didn't end like that. It ended in another way. So stories which are of the olden times, which cannot be very clearly verified, have their various versions, and that is what happens here, that there are various versions of this story, and these are all very interesting versions that you come across. Yes,
Many layers of opinions and personal choices have covered the real story of Heer and Ranjha.
yes,
Varis Shah's narrative was authentic as it showcased Punjab in its what it was, with its whether it be its societal condition. or how the society, or like how the society functions, what were its laws, and to some and to large extent, these conditions, like, how are they still relevant?
See, you have rightly mentioned this point that he belonged to that place. The Varisha's version is authentic because he knows the place, he knows the location, he knows the conditions there, he knows the geography of that, he knows the culture of that. That's why he is in a position to tell you authentic tale. And it may not be the same with other writers who have not been to that place, who haven't been a part and parcel of that culture and of that language and of the traditions of that place. Therefore, Varisha came directly in contact with his story and could identify and could write better. And that is how he went forward and developed a story which appealed to the common imagination with greater strength and vitality than the stories that come to us from other sources. So I would say, to put it briefly and to put it directly, I would say that since he belonged to that location, to that culture, to that area, so he knew the language, he knew the people, he knew the culture, and therefore he was in a position to tell that story better than many others, and that is how it has stayed on.
Many believe Heer Ranjha are just a fable and not a reality. What are your
Uh,
thoughts?
no, I don't think it's a fable. There is a chance that in the stories that are told, especially a story of the olden days, there are chances of variations in the narrative. This happened in the story of Heer Ranjha as well. There are variations in the narrative of Heer Ranjha. For example, especially towards the end, you see that the story comes to and they separate. And there is another version that no, he ultimately lost his life, and Ranja came. He also lost his life, ate from the same plate, which was poisoned, and finally he also died. So there are variations because these stories cannot be very clearly authenticated. These are the stories of olden times, 600 years, imagine, 600 years. So naturally, those who are the tellers of the story at the present point of time may not be in a position to ascertain the vital facts, but then there is a certain thread that runs through the story, and that is the thread is that how do you connect these two characters, that is on the one hand, that is the lover and the beloved, and those who stand in opposition to them, that is the father, that is the brother, and that is the husband. So there are clearly a division. So on the one hand, you have those who are seeking favor from each other, not favor, actually they are in sentimentally attached to each other, they're in love, but there is the world on the other side, which is like a wall, is standing like a wall, doesn't allow them to move beyond that wall or that boundary. So it's a very interesting dichotomy that these writers have tried to present. So what we should do while referring to these stories of the past, we should try and see that is there any common thread. When something is present, you are writing a story of the present times, then you can ascertain the facts with clarity. But when you are writing a story of the olden days, you cannot ascertain with that clarity, and therefore you have to depend at the what are the basic things and what is the roots and what is the the main thread that runs through the story. So from this point of view, even if there is a variation, we cannot say that this is myth. This is reality because it has been testified again and again. And as I said, that 20 versions in Persian and 15 at least in Urdu, and there are several others in different languages. So in many of the Indian languages, the story of Heer is there. So it is not myth that way. This is based in reality because the graves are there. People go and visit that area, and the place from Heer came and the place from Ranjha came. They're all real places, and these are the places to which people have been going and seeing them, and trying to remember those story that they had to tell to the world.
So, Heer and Ranjha, while being a popular love fable, also represent the societal restrictions over love, societal restrictions on caste very strongly.
That's
Uh,
true. That happens. Yes, this happens because those were the days of great restraint and constraints were there. There is a class struggle as well. You see that he comes from a class where father was very well off. Ranja also comes from a class where the father is very well off, but after the passing of her father, he has left home because the brothers were very cruel on him. So he was in a way a kind of a yogi. He left his family, his brothers, because the brothers didn't like him because they thought that he didn't work at all. and he didn't take care of the family. He didn't go for the farming. He only keeps on playing his flute. So they consider him something who is redundant for the family. Therefore, even while he belonged to a very rich family, he was of no use to the family, and they just sent him out. He left the place. Similarly, Ranjha also, he also came from a very well-to-do family. Her father also had land and everything, but she was alone. She was in isolation in the sense that she was disowned by father in a way. She was disliked by father and mother, and that is how, in spite of being economically very well off, they were not at all well off emotionally. So this kind of a hiatus or kind of a distance that developed, and this brought them to close together to each other. So they were not in a position to say that we are important because we have the power and the pelf. They didn't have any power and pelf, but they came to each other with great, say, they belonged to each other in a way. So there was a kind of rapport, there was a kind of emotional connect, there was a kind of a sentimental, sometimes sentimental, you will see that kind of a thing happening here. So it's not that, it's a meeting of the two souls, two pure souls meeting together, craving for each other, and trying to connect together and becoming one. And in death they became one, in life they couldn't.
So their story, uh, it also reflects the patriarchal society and how he,
Yes, I said that.
just
Yes,
like today's society has opposed to it. And
well, the patriarchal constraints are very much there. The whole story is based on the patriarchy, that system that was there, which didn't allow them to. This is something which has been there since eternity and even present today. But you cannot say that it presents in the present time. It exists in the same manner. It doesn't have that kind of say. There is freedom today. Lots of freedom is there. There is so much of liberalism there. So people have accepted if there is some situation in which the families do not agree, but at a point of time they come to agree. Those were different times. So we shouldn't be trying to develop a kind of a yardstick for all times and for all ages. The yardsticks are not there at all for all time. There's no one yardstick in the matters of love and war. So it keeps on changing, as I said at the beginning, that there are cultural variations, there are historical pressures. There are pressures of caste, there are pressures of tribe, there are pressures of the male and the female. So taking all these things together, we are talking of a story which is 600 years old. So naturally, the society is a closed society. But in spite of that, there is much of, say, liberalism that has come in, so much of free thinking that has come in. And because of all that, what I've seen, that the constraints that they face, probably the constraint is not what you face today. And it's a different world, very liberal world that you are living in. So certain basics are of course there, but the variations on those basics are also there. That has to be kept in mind. With the passage of time, it keeps on changing. Nothing is a static. Nothing is a static in times of love, in times of war. You will see that things on the parameters keep on changing.
uh, their story also, um, quite, they also like exchange swap gender roles, like stereotypical gender roles that are established. Here Ranjha, subordinately works for his father so that he can stay close to Heer.
Yeah, that is the story. Yes, you're right. But apart from staying close with each other, they also separate. And as I said, that they keep on separating and they keep on pining for each other. They keep suffering for each other in separation from each other. They suffer also. There are constraints. The familial constraints are there. The social constraints are there. He was brought to marry a person whom she didn't like, but the father was very much insistent that this should happen. That happened, but because that marriage didn't succeed. So these constraints were there. But two people who were essentially close to each other in terms of a spiritual kind of a connect that they had developed. So this is one part of the story, and that is a real part of the story, because the craving lies there. Craving for each other lies there. The people who came in their lives, for example, the uncle and the father and the husband who comes in their lives, the person to whom he is married or is put into a wedlock, and the qazi who brings them together and who takes her for nikah, and she had to accept it under duress. So all these things are happening there, but all these things are the constraints of the time. This is on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have a craving that two of them have for each other, and they cannot really negotiate with that, and therefore they suffer. They suffer wherever they are, and Ranja goes out, Ranja is sent out, Ranja remains in isolation, Ranja becomes a kind of a yogi, and finally he comes back, and then they meet, and the news comes that he has passed away. He doesn't believe. He comes to check for himself that he had passed away because the uncle had given him some sweets to eat, kheer. And when he came, when she consumed that, she passed away immediately. So he comes, he joins, and he also eats from the same plate, and he finally dies. So that is how the story comes to an end. So these constraints that you were talking about is of course there, but there are variations in the stories that you have from one person to another.
Sir, Varis Shah's poetry of Heer is completely immersed in Punjabi folklore, but the concept of love and in poetry and ghazals has traveled is also core is also a core in Urdu poetry and ghazals.
Yes, yes,
What,
true.
so, what are your thoughts on that?
These are basic human emotions, and not only in a particular language or in literature of a particular language or in the poetry of a particular language you have this. These are basic essential emotions. Like for example, air, earth, water, and fire. These are the elements. Similarly, in human nature, you have love, you have passion, you have hatred, you have envy. All these are things that we are made of. So not only in a particular language or a literature, like for example in Persian or Urdu, you have this. These are universal human experiences. That is why I used the phrase earlier when I started that there is a collective human consciousness. In that collective human consciousness, you have these elements of love, of hatred, of envy, of enmity. And that is how we are made of the earth and the air and the water and the fire. So in all of us, there is air and there is water and there is fire and there is earth. Similarly, there is love and there is hatred and there is envy and there is a kind of a submission also at the same time. But finally, you will see in the human beings of this kind that we are talking about, there is a kind of a spiritual connect as well. You have lots of novels, for example. You have lots of poetic texts in all cultures, not a particular language. All the world over, you will go and you will find love stories of this kind, where the characters are icons. They emerge as classes, they emerged as canonical figures. So these are the stories which are not limited to a particular language or to particular literature or particular literary genre. You have them in the stories, you have them in poetry, you have them in theater, you have them in film, you have them in prose narratives, you have the essays forms. So that is something which finds its roots and its place in all kinds of directions, all directions that you can think of.